The lights in the arena dim to a reverent gold, 15,000 faces glowing like a sea of phone screens waiting for something sacred. Jonathan Roumie steps to center stage in a simple navy shirt, the man who has brought Jesus to more homes than any preacher in history, and the crowd rises in a wave of love. You can feel it. This is the moment immigrant kids, queer believers, brown and black worshippers who never felt welcome in the old guard churches finally see someone who looks like mercy itself. Then Joyce Meyer strides out, confident, microphone gleaming like a scepter. She smiles the way empires smile, the smile that says she built all of this and everyone here owes her. The applause is polite, practiced. She thanks the crowd, then turns to Jonathan with that tilt of the head wealthy aunts give when they're about to correct the help. "Jonathan, sweetheart," she says, voice dripping with syrup that curdles midair, "we're so glad you could join us real ministers tonight." The arena inhales as one organism. 15,000 people just heard it. The word real, sharp as a border wall. The smirk that follows is quick, almost accidental, but the cameras catch it in brutal 4K. Jonathan's eyes widen for half a heartbeat, pain flashing across the face that launched a billion prayers. A woman in the front row, hijab pinned with a tiny cross, actually puts her hand over her mouth. Freeze on that smirk, freeze on his eyes, freeze on 15,000 dreams getting slapped in the same second. Because the man who spent years portraying the Jesus who washed feet and welcomed foreigners has just been told on a stage paid for by tithes and offerings that his brown skin, his Catholic beads, his lack of a mega church mailing list make him less than real. And in that frozen second, something ancient stirs behind his gaze, not anger, not yet. Just the quiet, terrifying certainty of someone who has already died to himself and has nothing left to lose. She thinks she just put him in his place. She has no idea she just handed the microphone to Christ himself. And what he says next doesn't just stun the room, it rewrites who gets to call themselves the church. This wasn't some random panel at a second-tier conference. This was the invitation-only Global Faith Summit, the Davos of American evangelicalism, where the gatekeepers decide whose voice gets amplified and whose gets muted. Jonathan Roumie had been personally courted for months, flown in first class, given the primetime slot right after the worship set that left half the arena in tears. Organizers knew exactly what they were doing. They wanted the face of the most watched Jesus in history to bless the stage, to pull in the younger crowd, the Spanish-speaking crowd, the ones who grew up feeling like outsiders in buildings that look nothing like the upper room. Because for millions of us, Jonathan isn't just an actor. It's the first time we saw Jesus laugh in Aramaic. The first time we heard Talitha Kum and felt it was spoken to us. The little brown girls told we talked too loud. The queer kids told we loved too wrong. The refugees told we prayed to the wrong God. When he breaks the bread on screen, our mothers light candles in apartments that still smell like the old country. When he touches the leper, we remembered every time a church usher looked at our clothes and pointed us to the back row. That's why Joyce's single word, real, landed like a deportation notice. Real ministers have seminaries on their resumes and 7-figure budgets and mostly white congregations that never ask where the money comes from. Real ministers don't need subtitles. Real ministers don't carry rosaries or speak with accents or dare to suggest that maybe, just maybe, the kingdom looks more like the people in the nosebleed seats than the people on the platform. In one smirking sentence, Joyce Meyer didn't just insult Jonathan Roumie. She insulted every immigrant mom who ever cleaned those mega church toilets at 4 a.m. so her kids could go to the Christian school. She insulted every autistic teenager who memorized scripture but stutters when called on in Bible study. She insulted every formerly incarcerated believer who found Jesus in a prison yard and now leads a home group the gatekeepers won't acknowledge. She drew a line in marble. Over here are the credentialed, the connected, the chosen. Over there are the rest of us, grateful to be allowed in the building, but never ever on the stage. The arena didn't know it yet, but that line just became a fault line, because the man she tried to shrink is the same man who spent 3 seasons of television proving that God picks the nobody, the forgotten, the ones the religious elite wrote off. And right now, 15,000 people, plus the hundreds of thousands watching the live stream from kitchen tables and refugee centers and prison command rooms are waiting to see if the Jesus they fell in love with on screen is real enough to answer when the Pharisees strike in real life. Joyce thinks the story ends with her smirk. She has no idea the resurrection is about to happen live on stage. And when it does, the entire Christian internet will never be the same. Long before that smirk froze 15,000 faces, Joyce Meyer was already a brand, a fortress, a carefully curated empire built on the promise that if you speak the right words with enough faith, God is contractually obligated to upgrade your life. And for decades, the formula worked brilliantly. Books that sold millions, conferences that filled stadiums, a headquarters in Fenton, Missouri that looks less like a church and more like a corporate campus for people who really, really love beige. The camera loves to linger on the private jet with the custom JM logo on the tail, the one she once justified by saying, "I refuse to stand in line with people who have demons." The audience laughed then, the way you laugh when someone powerful says the quiet part out loud, and you're just glad it wasn't aimed at you. Because beneath the folksy laugh and the Midwestern twang is a theology that quietly sorts the world into winners and whiners. Speak victory, get victory. Speak sickness, stay sick. Speak poverty, deserve poverty. It's a gospel that feels empowering until you realize it leaves no room for the widow with the 2 coins, the boy with the 5 loaves, the bleeding woman who couldn't afford the copay for 12 years of doctors. Joyce never says it outright, but the subtext is everywhere. In the clips that resurface every few years, the times she rolled her eyes at charismaniacs who cried during worship, calling them emotional like it's a disease. That conference where she mocked believers who live on feelings instead of the word, while the crowd roared approval because nobody in that room wanted to be the one accused of weakness. The throwaway line about people who let the devil steal their joy because they can't afford the conference ticket, spoken with the same tone you use when you blame the homeless guy for not pulling himself up by his non-existent bootstraps. And always, the flex. The $30 million campus with the fountain that spells hope and water jets. The makeup chair that costs more than most pastors make in a year. The way she'll quote James about teachers being judged more strictly, then immediately pivot to how God told her personally she deserves the best because she suffered enough. It's never crass, it's just constant. A slow drip of entitlement, disguised as blessing. Watch the old footage closely and you'll see it, the flicker of disdain. When someone asks a question that's too raw, too broken, too unpolished. The way her smile tightens when a young woman in a hijab or a man with prison tattoos dares to approach the book table. She'll sign the book, sure, but the eyes say, know your lane. That's the empire Jonathan Roumie walked into, one that has spent 40 years teaching people to declare and decree, while quietly decreeing that only certain voices get to declare anything at all. An empire that preaches God is no respecter of persons, but built velvet rope Christianity anyway, where the stage is elevated 10 feet above the crowd so no one forgets who's been blessed and who's still waiting their turn. Joyce Meyer never needed to say, I'm better than you. She built an entire worldview that does it for her. And on the night she decided to remind everyone of hierarchy, she picked the worst possible target. A man whose entire ministry is proof that God still delights in using the uncredentialed, the overlooked, the ones the system would never choose. She thought she was correcting an actor. She didn't realize she was stepping into a story that's been dismantling religious pride for 2,000 years. And the next few minutes are about to remind her in front of the whole watching world that some thrones aren't as secure as they look. Jonathan Roumie was never supposed to be here. He was born in New York City to an Egyptian father who carried the scent of Cairo in his cologne and an Irish-Lebanese mother who taught him to pray the rosary before he could spell his own last name. Brown kid in a country that still asks, but where are you really from? Every time he opened his mouth. He learned early that some doors only open if you look like the people already inside. And acting was the one door that sometimes let him slip through wearing someone else's skin. But Hollywood has a way of chewing up dreamers who don't come with trust funds. By his 30s, Jonathan was broke, couch surfing, eating rice and hot sauce for dinner because he was cheap and filled the stomach. He had $35 in the bank the week he almost quit. Instead, he drove to a quiet parking lot, clutched his rosary beads until the plastic cut into his palm, and surrendered. Not the pretty surrender you see on Instagram. The ugly, snot-nosed kind where you tell God, if you want me to keep going, you're going to have to carry me because I'm done. 3 days later, his manager called about an audition for a crowdfunded show no one had heard of. A show about Jesus, shot in Utah, paying barely scale, no guarantee it would ever air. Jonathan almost turned it down. He was tired of playing terrorists and cab drivers, but someone whispered, go. So he flew himself out on a credit card, walked into a room of strangers, and read the scene where Jesus calls Matthew from the tax booth. When he finished, Dallas Jenkins was crying. Amanda Jenkins was crying. The casting director whispered, that's him. That's actually him. The Chosen exploded, not because of marketing budgets, but because people who had never felt seen by church suddenly saw themselves in the disciples. The Samaritan woman looked like their tia. Peter cursed in Aramaic like their dad after the Jets lost. And Jesus looked like the Middle Eastern Jewish man he actually was, not the blue-eyed surfer on the Sunday school wall. Immigrant mothers in Queens started texting clips to their kids in college. Grandmas in Manila stayed up until 3 a.m. binge-watching with subtitles. A Syrian refugee in Germany wrote to Jonathan saying, I became Christian because your Jesus spoke Arabic and didn't look like the soldiers who bombed my village. And Jonathan never changed. He still goes to daily mass in whatever city the shoot lands him. Still turns down endorsement deals that would make him a millionaire overnight because he won't let the face of Jesus sell cologne or diet pills. When fans ask for selfies, he asks first if he can pray with them. When teenage girls tell him they're cutting, he kneels right there in the airport and prays the Our Father in a voice that makes security guards wipe their eyes. When a trans kid in Dallas handed him a pride flag and said, "Do you think Jesus hates me?" Jonathan wrapped him in a hug and whispered, "He's crazy about you. He made you on purpose." People started saying the same thing everywhere he went. I know it sounds insane, but when he looks at you, it feels like Jesus is looking at you. Not because Jonathan thinks he's Jesus, never that, but because he spent years becoming small enough for the role to shine through the cracks. He still lives in a modest apartment, still drives a used SUV with rosaries hanging from the mirror, still answers every single DM that says, "I'm thinking of ending it tonight." When the show made him famous, he didn't move to Nashville or buy a bigger house. He started a scholarship fund for Middle Eastern Christian kids who want to study film. He flies economy when the production doesn't pay for the ticket. He cries every time he films the crucifixion because, in his words, "I know what it cost him to love us this much." This is the man Joyce Meyer decided to call not a real minister. The man who has led more people to baptism through one television show than most megachurches do in a decade. The man who turned down Netflix money to keep the show free forever because Jesus isn't behind a paywall. The man who still flinches when someone calls him famous because all he ever wanted was to be faithful. And now, on a stage built by tithes and offerings, the empire of polished perfection is about to discover what happens when you hand a microphone to someone who has nothing to protect, nothing to prove, and everything to give away. Because Jonathan Roumie didn't come to win a debate. He came carrying the same spirit that once overturned tables and welcomed children the disciples tried to shoo away. And in a few minutes, 15,000 gatekeepers are about to remember why the first will be last, why the meek inherit the earth, and why sometimes God hides his greatest authority in a brown-skinned nobody the system never expected to speak. The moderator had just asked Jonathan to share how the chosen is reaching people traditional churches never could. His answer was gentle, almost whispered, "The way you speak when you're talking about something holy." He was midway through a story about a Muslim teenager in Indonesia who came to faith because Jesus called Matthew friend in Arabic when Joyce leaned forward, hand already on her mic. "Sweetheart," she cut in, voice bright and sharp like fluorescent light, "that's real cute, but let's be honest. You're an actor. You didn't go to seminary. You don't have a church. Maybe we should let the real preachers handle the theology tonight." The sentence landed like a slap across 15,000 faces. The moderator's mouth opened, then closed. A producer off stage froze with his headset half raised. Somewhere in row 3, a Latina pastor actually gasped out loud. Phones that had been recording every second suddenly tilted upward, hungry, sensing blood in the water. Jonathan blinked once. The camera zoomed tight on his face, merciless 4K, catching the exact moment the kindness in his eyes flickered into something raw. Hurt? Yes, but deeper than that. Recognition. He had heard this tone before, from casting directors who said his name was too ethnic, from church ladies who asked if he was fully saved because he crossed himself, from border agents who made his father empty every pocket to prove he belonged. Joyce wasn't finished. She gave that little chuckle reserved for children who've forgotten their place. "I mean, bless your heart, we love what you do on TV, but there's a difference between playing Jesus and actually feeding my sheep for 40 years. Some of us have paid the price to stand on platforms like this." The arena went colder than any air conditioning could explain. You could see it ripple outward section by section. The immigrant section near the back, the ones who'd driven 6 hours from rural Georgia because Jonathan was speaking, suddenly sat straighter, eyes narrowing. The Gen Z kids in matching chosen shirts clutched each other's sleeves. An elderly black deacon in the front row shook his head slow, like he'd seen the script before and knew how it ended for people who looked like Jonathan. Jonathan's fingers tightened around the microphone. For one terrifying second, it looked like he might apologize, shrink, hand the moment back to the empire that had always decided who gets to speak for God. Then something shifted. Not anger, not yet, just a stillness so complete the arena itself seemed to lean in. His shoulders dropped half an inch, the way they do when an actor finally finds the truth of the scene. The pain was still there in his eyes, but behind it now burned something older than the stage, older than the cameras, older than Joyce's entire ministry. He looked at her, really looked. The way Jesus looked at the rich young ruler who loved his wealth more than the kingdom. The moderator tried to save it. "Sister Joyce, maybe we can..." But Joyce waved him off with a smile that said she was doing Jonathan a favor by correcting him publicly. No, it's fine. Some people need to know their lane." 15,000 people stopped breathing. And in that vacuum, that electric silence where empires usually win, Jonathan Roumie lifted the microphone to his lips. What came out next wasn't planned, wasn't rehearsed, wasn't safe. It was the sound of every outsider who ever got told to sit down and shut up finally being handed the mic by the one who wrote their name in his scars. And when he spoke, the entire arena realized the real drama had only just begun. The silence stretched so long you could hear the hum of the arena lights. Jonathan didn't rush. He let the choir do its work. 15,000 people leaned forward as one body, the way crowds used to lean in when a prophet was about to speak, and nobody knew if it would be blessing or thunder. He looked at Joyce, not with hatred, never that, but with the kind of sorrow you feel when someone you prayed for chooses the very thing that's killing them. His eyes were wet, but his voice, when it finally came, was steady as Galilee water turned to wine. Sister Joyce, he said, soft enough that every microphone in the building strained to catch it. Jesus never asked a woman at the well for her seminary degree. He never checked Peter's resume before he said, feed my sheep. And when he hung dying on a cross between two thieves, he didn't wait for the Pharisees to credential the man he promised paradise to. He paused. The arena was so still, you could hear hearts breaking open. Then he smiled, the same smile that made 2 billion people fall in love with the Jewish carpenter from Nazareth. Gentle, unbreakable, and aimed straight at the throne Joyce has spent 40 years building. The only qualification Jesus ever required, he said, was a heart desperate enough to say yes. And last I checked, he's still using nobodies to shame the wise. He let the mic drop, not literally. He's too gracious for that, but he lowered it slowly, deliberately, and turned to face the crowd. The sound that followed wasn't applause at first. It was a roar that started somewhere in the cheap seats where the immigrants and the recovering addicts and the kids with rainbow pins always sit. It rolled forward like a wave, gathering volume, gathering tears, until the entire arena was on its feet, screaming, like the walls of Jericho had just come down. Grown men in the front row, pastors with doctorates and megachurch budgets were openly sobbing with their hands in the air. A black grandmother in a purple hat stood shouting, "That's my Jesus," over and over until she couldn't speak anymore. The live stream chat became pure chaos. Fire emojis, crying emojis, all caps glory, someone just typing, "He did not come to play with y'all," for 30 straight seconds. Joyce Meyer tried to laugh it off, the way powerful people do when the ground shifts under them. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Nothing came out. For the first time in 40 years on platforms like this, the woman who always had a word found herself with nothing to say. The camera caught it mercilessly, the tightening around her eyes, the way her fingers worried the diamond cross necklace, like it might protect her now. The moderator looked like he was watching the book of Acts happen in real time and had no idea what to do with his notes. But Jonathan wasn't finished. He lifted the mic again almost gently, like he was laying a hand on a wounded animal. "I love you, Sister Joyce," he said, and the tenderness in his voice somehow made it cut deeper. "I honor everything you've built, but the kingdom isn't a corporation, and the stage doesn't belong to the qualified. It belongs to the called. And right now, Jesus is calling every person in this room, every person watching on their phone in a refugee camp, or a prison cell, or a studio apartment with overdue rent, to remember that the same Spirit who raised him from the dead lives in them. Degree or no degree, platform or no platform, accent or no accent, past or no past." He turned to the crowd fully now, eyes shining with tears he wasn't ashamed to let fall. "You are the real ministers," he said. "You always were." And that's when the dam broke for good. People were hugging strangers. A teenage boy in a wheelchair was lifted onto his friend's shoulders, screaming through happy sobs. Someone started singing "How Great Is Our God" in Spanish, and the entire upper deck joined in. The Holy Spirit you usually only feel in grainy revival footage from the 90s decided to show up in 4K, surround sound, no admission fee. Joyce sat down, slowly, like someone had pulled the plug on the persona she'd worn for decades. The cameras didn't miss it. The way her hands folded in her lap, the way her gaze dropped to the floor. Not rage, just the stunned silence of a woman who has spent her life teaching people to speak things into existence and just heard someone speak the truth so plainly it rearranged the atmosphere. Phones were in the air everywhere. 15,000 tiny rectangles capturing the exact moment the old guard got passed by the Spirit they claimed to own. Within 30 seconds, hashtag Real Minister was trending worldwide. Within 5 minutes, clips of Jonathan's 9-word takedown were already being stitched on TikTok with captions like, "When you play Jesus and then become the sermon." ND somewhere in the middle of that holy chaos, Jonathan Roumie did the most Jesus thing of all. He stepped off the stage, walked straight into the crowd, and started hugging the very people Joyce had spent her life teaching to wait their turn. Because for him, the mic drop was never the point, bar. He embraced always was. ND, the internet, was about to spend the next week trying to recover from what happened when the least qualified man in the room reminded the most qualified woman in the room who actually owns the church. By the time Jonathan reached the lobby, the internet had already declared war. They clipped Twitter at 8:17 p.m. Central Time. By 8:23, hashtag Jonathan Roumie was the #1 trending topic in the United States, ahead of a Taylor Swift rumor and a presidential gaffe. By 8:41, it was global. Someone stitched the 9-second moment with the audio of Jesus overturning the tables in season 3 and captioned it, "Same energy." 10 million views in an hour. Dallas Jenkins posted a single black screen with white text. "I've watched that man pray on his knees for hours before every take. Tonight the world saw why God picked him. No emojis, no hashtags, just truth, and he broke the internet harder than any meme ever could." Then the unthinkable happened. Catholics and Protestants started agreeing in public. A Jesuit priest in Chicago tweeted the clip side by side with the Magnificat. "He has cast down the mighty from their thrones," and got ratioed by Pentecostals quoting it back in tongues. A Southern Baptist megachurch pastor who once called the chosen Catholic propaganda posted a tear-streaked selfie. "I was wrong. Jonathan Roumie just preached the best sermon I've heard in 20 years. Instagram Reels became a revival. Brown girls with hijabs and trans guys with top surgery scars and formerly incarcerated dads with neck tattoos all posting the same sound. Jonathan's voice saying, "You are the real ministers," over slow motion videos of them leading Bible study in laundromats, feeding homeless vets, baptizing friends in bathtubs. The caption trended for days. "He saw us." Joyce's team waited exactly 4 hours, long enough to look deliberate, not long enough to look brave, then released the statement nobody asked for, sister. Joyce has always believed in the priesthood of all believers and regrets if anyone was offended. No apology. No mention of Jonathan by name. Just the spiritual equivalent of thoughts and prayers. The backlash was immediate and biblical. A Latina pastor with 1.2 million TikTok followers went live from her car and cried for 17 straight minutes. That's the same regret, if anyone was offended, they gave us when they said women cannot preach, when they said drums are demonic, when they said my accent makes me unfit. We're done. Comments poured in from every corner of the wounded body. Queer Christians who'd been told to hide, divorced women shamed from leadership, addicts dismissed as not victorious enough. They all said the same thing, some version of finally someone stood up and didn't back down. Memes were merciless and merciful at the same time. One showed Joyce's smirk next to the Pharisee praying, "Thank God I'm not like that tax collector," then cut to Jonathan hugging the trans kid in the lobby. Another just had the words, "When you play Jesus," and actually act like him over a slow zoom of Joyce sitting down. It got stitched 30 million times. By midnight, celebrities who never talk faith were talking. Lin-Manuel Miranda quote tweeted the clip, "Protect this man at all costs." A drag queen with 800K followers posted Jonathan's line over footage of her reading scripture to seniors in a nursing home. "Tell me again who the real ministers are." And still the statement from Joyce's camp never came. Because for the first time in decades, the empire had no words left that could fix this. While Joyce's team huddled with crisis PR, Jonathan was spotted at a 24-hour diner in downtown Dallas, buying pancakes for a group of teenagers who'd driven in from Laredo just to see him speak. Someone filmed him praying over their food, foreheads touching, no cameras asked for, no moment manufactured. That video hit 100 million views before sunrise. The church, for one blazing moment, looked less like a corporation and more like the family Jesus died for, messy, magnificent, brown and broken, beautiful, choosing size not by denomination or donor level, but by who was willing to love out loud when it cost something. And somewhere in the middle of that holy uproar, millions of us who had spent our lives being told we were not real enough finally heard a voice we'd waited for our whole lives. "You are seen. You are called. You are enough." The aftermath wasn't the end of the story. It was the moment the story remembered who it had always belonged to. 2 days later, when the internet was still on fire and the think pieces were multiplying like loaves and fishes, Jonathan Roumie did what he always does. He disappeared into prayer. No press release, no counter interview, no victory lap. At 6:03 a.m. on a Sunday, he posted a 3-minute video from the corner of his bedroom. Bare walls, a simple wooden cross, morning light, spilling across the same face the world now knew could silence an empire. He was wearing an old gray hoodie, hair still messy from sleep, eyes red like he'd spent the night carrying every wounded comment section hard to the throne. "Hi family," he began, voice soft, almost shy. "I've been praying about what happened, and I need to say something while it's still tender." And he did the most revolutionary thing imaginable. He refused to weaponize the moment he'd just been handed. "I was hurt," he admitted. "No performance, no polish, but hurt doesn't get the last word. Jesus does." He leaned closer to the camera, the way Jesus leaned toward the woman caught in adultery. "Sister Joyce is my sister. She's family. And family gets to wound us because family is where we learn to forgive fast and love anyway. So I forgive her publicly, completely, joyfully. I'm praying for her peace, for fresh revelation, for the same gentleness she maybe never got to receive. You could hear a million keyboards stop typing. Then he smiled, the same smile that healed lepers on television and turned the knife into a mirror. But forgiveness doesn't mean we ignore what the moment revealed. There's a spirit of elitism that's been hurting the body for generations. Telling immigrants, telling queer kids, telling single moms, telling anyone without a platform that they're second-class citizens in the kingdom. That spirit didn't start with Joyce and it didn't end with her. It's the same spirit that made the Pharisees furious when fishermen started preaching. It's the same spirit that told Mary Magdalene she wasn't qualified to announce the resurrection. He lifted his rosary, let the bees click softly. Real authority doesn't come from stages or degrees or donor lists. It comes from a heart that's been broken open and filled with Jesus. The disciples weren't scholars, they were day laborers with dirty nails and criminal records and accents the elite made fun of. Yet Jesus handed them the keys. He still does. He looks straight into the lens, straight into every hidden hurt watching. If you've ever been told you're not educated enough, not straight enough, not rich enough, not healed enough to speak for God, hear me, the tomb is still empty and the commission is still go. Your scars are your credentials. Your tears are your theology. Your yes is enough. Then he did something that wrecked the entire internet all over again. He got on his knees, right there on the carpet, hoodie, and oh, I want to pray for Joyce, he said, voice cracking with love. And I want to pray for every person who's ever been made to feel small by the very church that was supposed to make them feel found. He prayed like a man who had nothing to prove and everything to give, blessing over Joyce, restoration over every gatekeeper heart, freedom over every believer who'd been shamed into silence. When he said amen and looked up, tears were streaming down his face, but his smile was sunrise. This is the Sermon on the Mount in 2025, someone commented before the video even ended. And within minutes, the entire comment section was weeping in every language on earth. Protect this man at all costs. I just got baptized in my kitchen. Jesus just spoke through his friend and I'm not okay. 3 minutes. No production, no anger, just love sharp enough to cut pride off at the root and gentle enough to bandage every wound it left behind. That was the moment the church remembered what real authority looks like. It looks like a brown-skinned nobody on his knees, forgiving his enemy and commissioning the rest of us to rise. So let's go back one last time to that frozen second when everything changed. 15,000 souls holding their breath. Joyce's smirk still hanging in the air like smoke. Jonathan Roumie lifting the mic with the kind of calm that only comes after you've already died to yourself. And then the line that broke a century of spiritual gatekeeping wide open. The only qualification Jesus ever required was a heart desperate enough to say yes. And last I checked, he's still using nobodies to shame the wise. Watch it again in slow motion. Watch Joyce's smile flicker and die. Watch their arena rise like the dead at the voice of the one they came to meet. Watch grown men fall to their knees. Watch brown kids in the back row realize the kingdom has always had room for them at the front. That single sentence didn't just humble one woman, it dismantled every velvet rope the church ever built between the real ministers and the rest of us who were told to wait our turn. In a world that rewards loud platforms, private jets, and 7-figure stages, one quiet man with an accent and a rosary reminded the entire church who Jesus really is, the friend of sinners, the hope of outcasts, the God who chooses the foolish things to shame the wise and the weak things to shame the strong. He didn't need a degree. He didn't need permission. He just needed to be faithful. And because he was, millions of us who spent our lives being told we're not qualified, not polished, not worthy, finally heard the truth we were born for. Jesus already qualified you. Your scars, your story, your stumbling, yes? That's the only resume heaven ever asked for. So if this moved you, if something in your chest is still burning from the moment Jonathan Roumie looked straight into the camera and called you the real minister, do this right now. Hit subscribe, turn on the bell, share this video with every believer who's ever been shoved to the back row because of who they love, where they're from or how broken they still feel. Because the tomb is empty, the table is open, and the stage belongs to anyone desperate enough to say yes. We are the real ministers, and the church just remembered whose voice gets the final word.